The easiest way to answer a question in UPSC is to identify the keywords and then to break down the question into simpler parts with the help of those keywords. Now, to show you the same, I'll show you a question. The question says that it's a very interesting question. It says that awaken political consciousness of Indian masses bound with the dishonorable and cowardly insults of the British led to the movement of non cooperation. Now, what is the most important keyword here? The movement of non cooperation. The question is asking about the non cooperation movement between 1920 and 1922. The era of mass movement started with non cooperation movement in India. What are the other two keywords here? Increased political consciousness, and second, the cowardly insults inflicted by the British. So, what the question is asking here, that the increased political consciousness among the Indians and the insults inflicted by the British eventually led to the non cooperation movement. Now, break down the question with the help of these keywords. The first keyword is increased political consciousness. Now, see here, it was the time the First World War had created intense economic problem here in India. What was the time period of First World War? Between 1914 to 1919, the First World War was there. Intense economic crisis like situation had been in India because the British had diverted huge resources away from India. Now, certainly, when this huge economic crisis like situation was there, the people they would always be politically more active. Political consciousness would increase because the people would look for a change in governance. Then, the second factor was the 1916 Lucknow session of Indian National Congress, in which the moderates and the extremists they had all came together. Now, it's very important to know that in 1907 there was Surat session of Congress in which the extremists and the moderates they had got separated. But when the First World War was creating a new political churning in India, in 1916 in Lucknow session, the extremist and the moderate leaders they came back together. The reunion of the leaders between extremists and the moderates certainly created a new hope among the Indians, and that led to increased political awareness among the Indian masses. Then, don't you think that during the war, the First World War in Europe, intense propaganda was going on among the imperial powers? Think about Britain and Germany. They were fighting against each other in the First World War, and both of them they were trying to cut the support of each other from their colonies to weaken their position. So the British exposed the Germans how exploitative they were there in the exploitation of their colony, and in reverse, the Germans exposed the British how exploitative they were in their exploitation of India like colonies. But certainly, that all propaganda made the people of the colonies like India very much aware about the situation, leading to increased political consciousness. At the same time, in 1917, there was big Russian Revolution or Bolshevik Revolution. The simple general people in Russia, they toppled the powerful monarchy of Tsar. Don't you think that it would prove very inspiring for the Indians and they would hope to do the same against the British here in India? Not only this, the new communist government of USSR declared a support to the independence movements across the world in the colonies to get the support of the people for communist ideology. All that proved very inspiring for the Indians, and certainly all these factors combined together, which were giving increased political consciousness among the Indian masses. The second keyword is basically the cowardly insults inflicted by the British on the Indians. So, what the British did that insulted the Indians that time? The first one such act was the failed reform of the Government of India Act 1919. During the World War, to get the support of the Indians, the British had come up with the August Declaration of 1917, in which they had proposed progressive realization of responsible government in India within the British Empire. But after the war, they went back on their promises and they came up with the failed reform of 1919, which was very problematic because of a system like diarchy. So, what was the system of diarchy? Under the system of diarchy in provinces, the subjects were divided into two groups like transferred and reserved. The reserved subjects were very important, like revenue, and they had to be controlled by the British. The transferred subjects were very full of responsibility and more problematic to deal with. They were given to Indians, like agriculture, like education, like health. Now, the diarchy like system was designed to fail because when the British controlled the revenues, how the Indians were expected to improve in the fields like agriculture, education, and health. Certainly, the Government of India Act 1919 was a failure. It was just a cheating with the Indians. Then the British also came up with the Rowlatt Act of 1919 that was clearly designed to suppress the expression of the resentment against the British government. It was called one act with no appeal, no vakil, and no dalil. British government got the authority to imprison anyone without any conviction and without any trial. Then, at the same stage, the protest against Rowlatt Act in Amritsar actually led to the Jallianwala Bagh issue, in which a big number of people they were killed by the cruelty of General Dyer. This massacre that was there by the British government certainly and clearly shook the conscience of the Indian people and certainly insulted us to maximum. And certainly now we were on the verge of starting a big mass movement. At the same time, there was intensifying Khilafat issue. In the First World War, Britain and France were fighting against Turkey. And when in the war Turkey got defeated, Britain and France decided a very humiliating treatment to be given to Sultan of Turkey. Now, Sultan of Turkey was also Caliph, and Caliph was considered single religious and political head of Islam. Certainly, that proved insulting for the Muslims across the world, including India, and that intensified the Khilafat issue. Certainly, the British were inflicting so many insults on the Indians, creating conditions for the start of mass movement in India. But then the question tag was critically examined, so we have to figure out that there was increased political consciousness, and the British were inflicting so many insults over the Indians, creating the conditions for the start of mass movement. But ultimately, at this stage, it was the rise of charismatic Gandhian politics that guided us toward the era of mass movement.